Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you an example of how you might use a pivot table to look at recapture information between years for a set of banding data. So this is a set of banding data from a local banding station. We have lots of columns of information in this data set, including bander information, species codes, the actual band numbers, the age assessments of the birds, determinations looking at the skull, the fat, all sorts of standard maps information that is collected. And we also have the year here. And so for this type of, if I'm interested in looking at birds and looking at seeing between years and among years, how many times they're recaptured, there are lots of ways you could go about it that could be pretty time consuming, but pivot tables makes it pretty easy. So I'm going to take this data set and I'm going to make a pivot table. Okay, and so for my row data, I want that to be band number. So these rows represent individuals that were banded at this station. And then I'm actually also going to take band number and put it in my values. And so I want to make sure that band number, when they're calculating those values, they're not summing up those numbers. Those are actual they're numeric data, but they represent an individual. They're nothing that to be added up. So we're actually just counting the number of times that appears as a row in the data set here when we set it, the value field setting as count. Now I'm going to, for my column data, have years. And so I'm going to go down here and select year. And now what we have is this whole data set of bands and appearances of these birds by band number and year. And so I want to look at individual species, and I'm going to use the filter function. So I'm going to take species and put it into this filter field, and I'm going to do this by species. So I'm going to start with Buick's wren. And here are the data for just Buick's wren, okay? And you can see that a lot of these birds, if you just sort of scan through it, are just captured and banded once. They have one occurrence in 1 year. Some occur in 1 year multiple times, twice, even 4 times in the case of this bird, but not captured between years. And then other individuals like this one here was captured multiple years, and in some years, multiple times. So I want to start to use this data set to build a table that shows me the frequency distribution of how frequently birds are captured among years. And so I'm going to select the data from this pivot table. And I'm going to have to do a few things with it before it's ready for making that kind of a graph. So I'm going to select this data here. And I'm going to insert it into a new worksheet, okay? And so the first thing I want to do is I'm actually going to get rid of the grand total column, because I'm not, those values are going to be different pretty soon. I'm not interested in within year captures, and so I want to replace all these numbers that are not ones with 1. And I want that 1 to be, and what that 1 begins to represent then is occurrence of that bird in a year, okay? It may have occurred, it may have occurred multiple times in a year, but I just care whether it occurred or not. And so these larger than 1 numbers are going to be changed to 1. And for a data set like this, it's pretty easy. It's not a very large data set. I can simply look through all the data and replace everything that's not a 1 with a 1. Now, if you have a much larger data set, you're going to have to use some other tactics for making sure you're replacing all the non-1 fields with 1s. You can sort the columns as long as you're keeping the data all, set together. You can sort individual columns. You can do a find and replace. You have options here. And so I'm just selecting and replacing all the non-1s with 1s. Okay, and so I'm just sort of looking through, scanning through, making sure I've replaced everything. Much larger than this, and I probably would do something like a find and replace. Now, we're not quite there with being able to make this table that I'm going to make into a graph. The next thing I want to do is to sum up these ones. Okay, and when I do that, I'm going to just simply sum by row, do a sum function by row, and I'm going to copy this to the rest of the captures or the rest of the bands here. Okay, and so these are the sums of the between year captures. Okay, and so the next thing I want to do, I do a lot of copy pasting here just to keep things a little bit. Okay, oops, no, I don't want to do that. Actually, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to paste these as just values so that I can start to do one extra step in my data. And I'm going to sort this entire data set by these sum values. Okay, and so I've sorted the data by the sum values. And so what you can see is all of these ones, I usually just scan through and check, make sure that everything that's a one, which is most of the bands in this data set, are indeed birds that were only captured in 1 year. Now we start to get to the twos. And what we can see is that birds with a sum of 2, some of them were captured in 2 consecutive years, but others like this one were actually captured with a year in between. So they were captured in 1 year, and then there was a second year, and then the third year they were recaptured. And so I want to get that information by inspecting this data. And so I'm going to have another column that I'm going to call between years, or the sum between years, sum of years. And so in this case, when it's 2 consecutive years, I'm entering a 2 and a 2. This case, there's also a 2, 2. But this case, that's 1, 2, 3. And the rest of these are 2s. Now let's do the same with the 3s. That's 3 consecutive years, 3 consecutive years. Good. This one is 1, 2, 3, 4 consecutive years. And then this bird was recaptured 4 times, but in 5, across a period of 5 years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to enter a 5 for that bird. So I'm going to call this years. And for the rest of these, it's just birds were captured. The rest of these were all ones. Okay. Now I'm almost ready to enter the data in the table. My last step is I'm going to sort this data one more time by that years field. Okay, and then I'm going to do a count. Okay, and so this is going to be the count. And so you can use the COUNTIF function or count function in your data set if you want to. So I could say equals count, and then I could select my range of values here and ask Excel to count it. Okay, and it did. Or I can also just highlight that range of values, and it tells me in the spreadsheet as I'm highlighting them how many there are. If I look down at this lower left part of the Excel sheet, it's saying that this is a count of 7. So I have 7 2s. And then 3 years, when I look at that, I have 1, 2, 3 occurrences of birds counted across 3 years, and 1 each for 4 and 5. Now I can make a bar chart with that information. I'm going to select bar chart. And you can see what we are now having is something it looks like a bar chart that's representing a frequency distribution here across years. Now you can make the chart look a bit nicer. One thing I might do is reduce the axis here. the y-axis to be something that has a smaller range of values, like maybe instead of 120, I would go to 110. It just stretches things out a bit more, and do some other things so that you can actually see these lower numbers. But again, this is representing Buick's-Wren frequency distribution of birds captured among years. And you can see most of them are only captured 1 year. All right.